Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Machine. The city exhaled a breath of stale, rain-soaked air that did nothing to stir the dead stillness of Vera's apartment. 3 monitors bled a cold blue light onto her face, carving her out of the shadows. Here, she wasn't Vera. She was Wraith, a phantom gliding through firewalls, a whisper that unraveled empires. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, a frantic, silent rhythm against the oppressive quiet. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, a digital waterfall she navigated with instinct honed by years of solitude. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, a lone testament to the tension coiling in her gut. She was deep, deeper than she'd ever dared to go. The target was a corporate behemoth, a pack of wolves in tailored suits who preyed on the weak. Their encrypted servers were a fortress, but Vera was a ghost, and ghosts don't need doors. A final, satisfying click echoed in the silence. She was in. Files bloomed across her screen. Shipping manifests, offshore accounts, names. So many names, each one a thread in a web of corruption she was about to burn to the ground. A bitter smile touched her lips. This wasn't justice, it was pest control. She packaged the data, a neat little bomb of information, and sent it to a journalist she trusted as much as one could trust anyone. Which wasn't much. As the files uploaded, her gaze snagged on a stray file, an anomaly in the clean architecture of the server. It was small, heavily encrypted, and tucked away in a deep recess of the system. Curiosity, a dangerous, long-dormant instinct, stirred within her. Her fingers flew, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The encryption was old, primal almost, not corporate, something else entirely. It fought back, a living thing with teeth and claws, but she was relentless. The final layer of code shattered and the file opened. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a memo. It was an invitation, written in an elegant, looping script that seemed to mock the cold, hard lines of the code surrounding it. The Argent Moon Gala, it read. A mate auction. Her blood ran cold. She knew of these barbaric events, these cattle markets where alphas shopped for breeding stock. But this one was different. This one was hosted by him. Alpha King Kingsley, the ruler of this cursed city, the man whose negligence had cost her everything. His name was a brand on her soul, a festering wound that never healed. A list of attendees scrolled down the page, a who's who of the city's elite. And then a separate list. The offerings. Young women, their pedigrees and attributes listed like prize horses. Disgust churned in her stomach, hot and acidic. She was about to close the file to scrub its filth from her system when a thought, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced the fog of her rage. What if she wasn't the ghost outside the walls? What if she became the ghost within? Her face, usually a mask of cold indifference, shifted. A flicker of something new, something terrible and resolute, ignited in her eyes. The pest control was over. It was time for a hunt. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. Kingsley sat on a throne of cold, unyielding stone, the weight of his crown a physical ache in his skull. The throne room was a cavern of shadows and silence, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay, the scent of his failing kingdom. Before him, the council of elders droned on, their voices a litany of complaints and dire warnings. He tuned them out, his gaze fixed on the stained glass window that depicted a great, silver wolf howling at a full moon. A bitter irony. His wolf, his spirit, hadn't howled in years. It paced the gilded cage of his ribs, a restless, snarling thing, sickened by the blight that was slowly strangling their lands. An elder, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and worry, stepped forward. The Western Pacts are on the brink of starvation, my king. The curse. It accelerates. The land dies, and with it, our people. Kingsley's jaw tightened. He knew. He saw it every time he closed his eyes. The withered trees, the dust-choked rivers, the hollowed-out faces of his people. What would you have me do, Ronan? He asked, his voice a low rumble that did little to hide his exhaustion. Send them food we do not have? Offer them hope when there is none? You need a mate, Your Majesty, another elder chimed in, his tone sharp with impatience. A Luna, a spirit wolf to anchor your power, to heal the land. It is the only way. A chorus of murmurs followed, a wave of agreement that crashed against Kingsley's already frayed nerves. A mate, a stranger to share his bed, his life, his burden. He had seen the hopeful, ambitious faces of the women presented to him. They saw the crown, the power. They didn't see the man drowning beneath it. He raised a hand, and the room fell silent. I have not found my fated mate, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I will not be shackled to a stranger for political convenience. He pushed himself to his feet, the movement weary, ancient. This council is dismissed. The elders shuffled out, their disapproval a palpable force in the room. Only one remained, his mentor, the man who had taught him how to fight, how to rule, how to bury his heart so deep no one could ever touch it. They are right, you know, the old wolf said, his voice a soft rasp. He placed a hand on Kingsley's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. The land is tied to your spirit, and your spirit is untethered. It needs an anchor, my boy. A mate. Kingsley turned away, staring out at the blighted city. And where do you suggest I find this anchor? He scoffed. His mentor leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. There is an event, an unconventional one. The Argent Moon Gala, a mate auction. It is beneath you, I know, but desperate times. He let the words hang in the air, a seed of an idea that, despite his revulsion, began to take root in the barren soil of Kingsley's hope. Chapter 3. The Price of Admission. The alley reeked of stale beer and desperation, a fitting backdrop for the devil's bargain she was about to make. Vera stood in the shadows, a ghost in a city of ghosts, her face obscured by a hooded cloak. The man who emerged from the darkness was more weasel than wolf, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. He was a broker, a purveyor of secrets and lies, and for the right price, he could get anyone into anywhere. Even the king's mate auction. You have it? He rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. Vera said nothing. She simply extended a hand, a data chip resting in her palm. It contained enough blackmail material to ruin him a dozen times over. His eyes widened, a flicker of fear replacing the greed. And the payment, he added, his voice a little steadier. She produced a briefcase and opened it. Stacks of untraceable currency, a small fortune she had bled from the corporate pigs she hunted. It was everything she had. He snatched the briefcase and the chip, his movements quick and furtive. The file? Vera asked, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. He handed her a slim, unmarked folder. Inside was her new identity, a feral rogue, captured in the outer territories. No pack, no history, no scent. A blank slate. A ghost. You're sure this will work? She pressed, her gaze pinning him to the spot. They won't scent me? He shook his head. The file contains a recommendation from a very influential source. They won't look too closely. And the lack of scent, they'll assume it's a side effect of your feral nature. He smirked, a flash of yellow teeth in the gloom. Good luck. She was on her own now. The auction was held in a lavish, opulent ballroom, a stark contrast to the city's decay. The air was thick with the cloying scent of perfume and power, a heady mix that made her stomach churn. The other women were peacocks. Dressed in silks and jewels, their scents a desperate plea for attention. Vera, in her simple, dark dress, was a crow among them. Invisible, unseen, just as she had planned. She was led to a waiting area, a gilded cage filled with nervous, chattering women. Their scents were a cacophony of fear, ambition, and a desperate, pathetic hope. Vera felt nothing but the cold, hard weight of her purpose. She was not here to be chosen. She was here to get close to the king, to find his weakness, to make him pay for his sins. The ballroom doors opened, and a hush fell over the room. It was time. As she stepped into the dazzling light, a wave of powerful, intoxicating scents washed over her, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But her own scent remained a void, a black hole in the scented tapestry of the room. She was a ghost in a world of wolves, and her hunt was about to begin. Chapter 4. The King's Gambit. The air in the ballroom crackled with anticipation, a thick, cloying thing that tasted of expensive perfume and primal ambition. One by one, the women were paraded across the auction block, their smiles brittle, their eyes hungry. When Vera's turn came, a hush fell over the crowd. She walked with a steady, defiant gait, her simple dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns of the others. Her lack of scent was a void in the room, a puzzle the alphas couldn't solve. They sniffed the air, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disdain. "A rogue," one muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Scentless. Defective." Another sneered, "Look at her. No fire, no spirit." The auctioneer, a slick, well-dressed man with a practiced smile, tried to salvage the situation. "A unique specimen," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "A blank slate, ready to be molded by a strong alpha." But the damage was done. The alphas turned away, their interest gone. Vera stood there, a ghost on a pedestal, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. Humiliation was a foreign, bitter taste. She had expected to be overlooked, but the open revulsion was a new kind of sting. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his smile faltering. "Do I have any bids? Any at all?" The silence was his answer. He raised his gavel, a final, damning motion. "Unwanted, then. A shame. I'll take her." The voice cut through the silence, a low, rumbling command that sent a shiver down Vera's spine. Every head in the room turned. There, in the shadows of a private balcony, stood Alpha King Kingsley. He descended the stairs, his movements fluid, predatory. The crowd parted before him like a wave. He stopped at the foot of the auction block, his eyes, the color of molten gold, fixed on hers. He wasn't looking at her like the others had. He was looking through her, as if he could see the ghost she had so carefully constructed. He extended a hand, a silent command. "Come." She hesitated, her mind reeling. This wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to be a distant, untouchable target, not this immediate, overwhelming presence. But she had no choice. She placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded. A jolt of pure, raw energy surged between them, a lightning strike that lit up the room. Vera cried out, her body arching as a dormant, sleeping part of her roared to life. Her spirit wolf, awakened by his touch, unleashed a wave of power that sent the nearest guards flying. The room erupted in chaos. Kingsley didn't flinch. He simply tightened his grip, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. Recognition. "You," he breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. He pulled her from the block, his arm a band of steel around her waist, and dragged her through the pandemonium, away from the prying eyes, into the shadows of his castle. Chapter 5. The Gilded Cage. The door slammed shut, the sound of the heavy lock clicking into place a final, damning note. Vera was alone. Or, as alone as one could be in a gilded cage. The chamber was luxurious, a far cry from her Spartan apartment, but the opulent furniture and silk sheets did little to quell the rising panic in her chest. She was a prisoner. She rushed to the windows, her fingers tracing the cold, unyielding glass. Barred. Of course. She tested the door, her shoulder thudding against the solid wood. Useless. She was trapped, her carefully laid plans in ashes around her. She paced the room, a caged animal, her mind a whirlwind of frantic thoughts. The jolt, the power. What was it? What had he done to her? She had heard tales of fated mates, of bonds that snapped into place with a single touch, but she had dismissed them as fairy tales, as sentimental nonsense. But the memory of that raw, untamed energy, of her own dormant spirit roaring to life, it was too real to deny, and it terrified her. The door opened, and Kingsley stepped inside, his presence filling the room, sucking the very air from her lungs. He was even more intimidating up close, a mountain of a man with eyes that saw too much. He said nothing, simply watched her, his expression a mask of cold curiosity. "What do you want from me?" Vera demanded, her voice a low, dangerous snarl. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his golden eyes. "You are my property now," he said, his voice a calm, infuriating rumble. "I bought you. You belong to me." Rage, hot and blinding, surged through her. "I belong to no one," she spat, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He took a step closer, and she held her ground, refusing to show a single crack in her defiant facade. "Your little display in the ballroom suggests otherwise," he countered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That power, I felt it. A spirit wolf. A dormant one. How is that possible?" She said nothing, her jaw tight. She would give him nothing. He was the enemy, the man who had let her family die. She would rather die than give him the satisfaction of an answer. "So, the little rogue has claws," he mused, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Good. I was getting bored of the simpering peacocks my council keeps parading before me." He gestured to the room, to the single, massive bed that dominated the space. "Make yourself comfortable. We have much to discuss." He turned his back to her, a deliberate, calculated gesture of dominance. He was dismissing her, treating her as a mere curiosity, a new toy. The arrogance of it, the sheer, unadulterated power. It was infuriating. And yet, a small, treacherous part of her, the newly awakened wolf within, recognized it. It recognized him. And it did not cower. It rose to meet the challenge. The battle for control had just begun. As night fell, they remained on opposite sides of the room, two predators locked in a silent, tense standoff, the darkness between them humming with unspoken threats and a terrifying, undeniable connection. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The first wave of heat hit her like a physical blow, a sudden, searing fire that started in her bones and spread outwards. Vera gasped, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The room, which had felt so vast and empty moments before, was now closing in on her, the shadows twisting into menacing shapes. The wolf inside her, the one he had awakened, was a raging inferno, a wild, untamed thing that was tearing her apart from the inside out. She stumbled, her vision blurring, and collapsed onto the cold stone floor, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Kingsley was at her side in an instant, his cold facade cracking to reveal a flicker of something that looked dangerously like concern. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice sharp with an urgency that cut through the haze of her pain. "What's wrong with you?" She tried to push him away, to snarl at him to leave her alone, but her limbs were heavy, her tongue thick and useless. The fire was getting worse, a searing agony that was burning away her control, her very sense of self. "Get away from me," she managed to gasp, her voice a raw, broken thing. But he didn't listen. He reached for her, his hand hovering over her forehead. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, the fire receded, the raging inferno inside her calming to a low, simmering heat. The relief was so sudden, so profound, that a sob escaped her lips. She leaned into his touch, her body craving the cool, steadying anchor of his presence. But the wolf was not so easily tamed. It saw him not as a savior, but as a threat, a cage. With a guttural snarl that was not entirely her own, she lunged at him, her nails extended like claws. He caught her easily, his grip like iron on her wrists. He wasn't angry. He was fascinated. Incredible, he murmured, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of awe and scientific curiosity. The bond, it's fighting itself. Your spirit recognizes mine, but your mind is at war with it. He pinned her to the floor, his body a heavy, unyielding weight on hers. He wasn't hurting her. He was containing her. He lowered his head, his face inches from hers, his breath warm on her skin. "Fight it, and it will destroy you," he whispered, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "Accept it. Accept me." He pressed his hand to her chest, right over her heart, and the raging fire within her finally, blessedly, went out. She was left weak, trembling, her body aching with an exhaustion so profound it felt like a death. The wolf was quiet, a low, rumbling purr in the back of her mind. She lay there, gasping for breath, the weight of him a strange, unsettling comfort. The defiance, the rage, it had all been burned away, leaving behind a raw, terrifying vulnerability. She had lost control, utterly, completely, and he had been the one to pull her back from the brink. The realization was a cold, hard knot of fear in her stomach. She pushed against his chest, her strength slowly returning. He let her go, his eyes never leaving hers. She scrambled backwards, away from him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The predator had become the prey, and the hunter had become the hunted. She looked at him, at the man she had come to destroy, the man who was now the only thing that could keep her from unraveling, and a single, terrified question escaped her lips, a whisper in the sudden, deafening silence. What was that? Chapter 7. The Lay of the Land. Freedom, Vera discovered, was a matter of perspective. The bars on her window were gone, the heavy lock on her door removed. She was permitted to wander the castle's winding stone corridors, to explore its shadowed courtyards and cavernous halls. But freedom it was not. A pair of royal guards, silent as statues, followed her every move, their presence a constant, suffocating reminder of her status. She was a curiosity, a pet, a prisoner on a longer leash. The castle itself felt sick, a slow, creeping decay radiating from its very stones. A curse wasn't just a magical affliction, it was an atmosphere. It was the way the tapestries hung limp and faded, the way the air tasted of dust and despair, the way an oppressive silence seemed to swallow every sound. The scents were the worst part. Her own lack of one had always been her shield, a cloak of invisibility. Now, she was adrift in an ocean of them, a tidal wave of emotions she had never had to navigate. She could smell the guards' boredom, the kitchen staff's fear, the courtiers' simmering ambition. It was a language she didn't speak, a constant, overwhelming roar of information that left her head spinning and her nerves raw. She sought refuge in the quietest, most forgotten corners of the castle, places where the air was still and the ghosts of the past outnumbered the living. It was in one such place, the castle library, that she found him. The room was a forgotten cathedral of knowledge, the air thick with the musty, comforting scent of aging paper and leather. Sunlight streamed through a high, arched window, illuminating swirling dust motes in its golden shafts. And there, at a massive table piled high with ancient, crumbling tomes, sat the king. He wasn't the predator she had met in her chamber, or the ruler who presided over a dying kingdom. He was a scholar, a man desperately searching for an answer in the faded ink of the past. His crown was gone, his dark hair was mussed, and the lines of exhaustion around his eyes seemed deeper in the soft, forgiving light. He didn't notice her at first. He was completely absorbed, his long fingers tracing a line of archaic text. She stood in the shadows, watching him, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in her chest. For the first time, she saw not the king, not the enemy, but a man as trapped as she was. A man carrying a burden so immense it was slowly crushing him. He looked up then, his golden eyes meeting hers across the expanse of the room. He didn't seem surprised to see her. The guards at the door tensed, but he gave them a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. In the quiet, dusty silence of the library, a silent, fragile truce was formed. A shared moment of understanding, a recognition of the lonely, gilded cages they both inhabited. He turned back to his book, and she slipped away, the image of the solitary king seared into her mind. The lines of battle, once so clear, had begun to blur. Chapter 8. A useful weapon. Vera's hands, tucked into the pockets of her simple dress, were far from idle. Her fingers worked deftly, manipulating a tiny, almost invisible device she had concealed in the hem of her sleeve. A micro-transceiver, her own personal ghost in the machine. While her guards watched her wander the gardens, her mind was a whirlwind of code and data streams. She had found a weak point in the castle's internal network, an old, forgotten server that was her gateway to the kingdom's secrets. She wasn't looking for state secrets, not yet. She was looking for leverage, a way to prove she was more than just the king's latest acquisition, a way to turn her cage into a weapon. It didn't take her long to find it. A discrepancy in the royal ledgers, a trickle of funds and supplies being diverted from the main storehouses. It was a small, insignificant amount in the grand scheme of things, but the trail led to a minor council member, a man with a reputation for greed and a taste for luxuries the kingdom could no longer afford. It was a start, a small rotten thread she could pull to see what unraveled. She downloaded the incriminating data, her heart a steady, determined drum against her ribs. Now came the hard part. She didn't go through the guards. She didn't request an audience. She waited until nightfall, until the castle was quiet and the shadows were deep. She bypassed the guards outside the king's study with a whispered word and a flash of something in her hand that might have been a key card or might have been a trick of the light. She found Kingsley at his desk, a mountain of paperwork before him, his face a mask of weary concentration. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice a low growl. "I grow tired of being where I'm supposed to be," she countered, her voice calm, steady. She placed a data slate on his desk and pushed it towards him. "You have a thief in your midst." He looked at the slate, then back at her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. He picked it up, his thumb swiping across the screen. He read in silence, his jaw tightening with each new piece of evidence. The ledgers, the secret accounts, the damning proof of the councilman's betrayal. When he was finished, he set the slate down, his golden eyes boring into hers. "How did you get this?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I have my methods," she replied, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "I am resourceful." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound in the room the crackling of the fire in the hearth. She had expected anger, suspicion, perhaps even a grudging respect. She had not expected him to smile. It was a small, fleeting thing, but it reached his eyes, chasing away some of the weariness that clung to him like a shroud. "You are full of surprises, little ghost," he said, the words a soft rumble that sent a strange, unfamiliar shiver down her spine. "Perhaps you are more than just a pretty face after all." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've earned a little more freedom. Let's see what other pests you can find in my castle." The dismissal was clear, but the words were a victory. She had proven her worth. She was no longer just a pet. She was a weapon, and she was just getting started. Chapter 9. Marked as his. The Great Hall was a sea of bodies, a cacophony of scents and sounds that grated on Vera's already frayed nerves. It was the first formal pack gathering since her arrival, and she could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility. She stood beside the throne, a silent, solitary figure in a room that pulsed with the lifeblood of the pack. Kingsley had insisted she attend, a silent command she could not refuse. It was a statement, a display of his new acquisition, and the pack was not pleased. The challenge, when it came, was not unexpected. A hulking alpha from a minor pack, his face a mask of arrogant disdain, stepped forward. "My king," he boomed, his voice dripping with false deference. "You honor us with your presence, but you dishonor us with hers." He pointed a thick, sausage-like finger at Vera. "A scentless rogue, a weakling. She has no place by your side." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Vera's hands clenched at her sides, her knuckles white. She would not let them see her fear, but it wasn't fear that was rising in her chest. It was something else, something hot and wild. The wolf inside her, the one that had been sleeping fitfully since the night of her unraveling, was stirring. It bristled at the challenge, at the insult to its mate. The thought was a shock, a jolt of lightning that rocked her to her core. Before she could react, before the wolf could break free, Kingsley moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply stepped in front of her, a silent, immovable wall between her and the challenger. "She is not a rogue," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that carried to every corner of the hall. "She is mine." He reached back, his hand finding the small of her back, a gesture of possession that was both a comfort and a cage. He pulled her flush against him, his body a warm, solid shield. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin just below her ear, and inhaled, a deep, possessive sound that sent a jolt of heat through her. The scent marking was a primal, intimate act, a public declaration of his claim. The hall fell silent, the collective gasp of the pack a testament to the shock of his actions. The challenging alpha paled, his arrogance draining away to be replaced by a healthy dose of fear. He bowed his head, a gesture of submission. "My apologies, Alpha King," he stammered, before melting back into the crowd. Kingsley didn't release her. He kept her there, tucked against his side, his hand a warm, possessive weight on her back. The message was clear. She was his. To challenge her was to challenge him. The pack, their loyalties fickle, began to murmur their approval. The scentless rogue was now the king's chosen, and that was all that mattered. Later that night, in the quiet of her chamber, she found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the darkness. He turned from the window, his golden eyes unreadable in the moonlight. "Because you're mine now," he said, the words a familiar refrain. But this time they were different. They weren't a statement of ownership. They were a promise, a declaration. His eyes held a deeper, unspoken meaning, a raw, protective instinct that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with the wild, untamed thing that now bound them together. And for the first time since she had set foot in this cursed castle, Vera didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt safe. Chapter 10. Threads of a Conspiracy. The disgraced councilman, stripped of his titles and wealth, had sung like a canary. The name he gave them, however, was not the mastermind they had expected, but another small, insignificant thread in a much larger, more complex tapestry. And so, the hunt began in earnest. The nights blurred into a clandestine routine. After the castle had fallen into a slumbering silence, Vera and Kingsley would convene in the king's private study, the room lit only by the soft glow of a datapad and the flickering flames of a dying fire. She was the ghost, slipping through digital firewalls, tracing encrypted communications, and pulling on the delicate threads of the conspiracy. He was the strategist, his keen mind piecing together the fragmented data, his knowledge of the court and its intricate web of alliances and rivalries, providing the context she lacked. They were a surprisingly effective team. Her modern digital savvy complemented his ancient tactical mind. She would unearth a name, a location, and he would provide the history, the motive, the weakness. They argued, they debated, their voices low and intense in the dead of night, but with each new discovery, a grudging respect grew between them. She saw past the weary, burdened king to the sharp, brilliant mind beneath. He saw past the feral, defiant rogue to a woman of fierce intelligence and an unyielding will. The space between them, once a chasm of hostility and suspicion, was slowly, imperceptibly, closing. One night, after a particularly frustrating dead end, he pushed away from the desk, his shoulders slumping with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. He walked to the balcony, the cold night air ruffling his dark hair. Vera followed, a silent shadow at his side. Below them, the city was a scattering of dim, flickering lights, a pale imitation of the vibrant metropolis it had once been. The blight was creeping in, a slow, inexorable tide of decay. "I have failed them," he said, his voice a low, raw whisper that the wind almost stole away. "My father, his father before him, they ruled over a flourishing kingdom. I rule over a graveyard." She had never heard him so vulnerable, so stripped of his royal authority. The Vera of a few weeks ago would have reveled in his pain, would have twisted the knife of his failure. But the woman standing beside him now felt a strange, unwelcome pang of empathy. "This isn't your fault," she said, her voice softer than she intended. The curse is my responsibility," he interrupted, his voice tight with a self-loathing that mirrored her own. "It is my burden to bear." He turned to her then, his golden eyes shimmering in the faint moonlight. "It is a lonely burden." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile, trembling thing. He was not just a king, he was a man, a lonely, desperate man. And in his loneliness, she saw a reflection of her own. For the first time, she saw not an enemy, but an ally, a kindred spirit in a world that had betrayed them both. The war for the kingdom had suddenly become a very personal battle. Chapter 11. The Serpent in the Garden. The arrival of Luna Serafina was a spectacle of calculated grace and overwhelming power. She swept into the court like a summer storm, her beauty so radiant it was almost painful to behold. Her scent a heady, intoxicating perfume of moonflowers and raw, untamed magic. She claimed to be a spirit wolf, like Vera. But where Vera's power was a hidden, sleeping thing, Serafina's was a brilliant, blinding inferno. She moved with a liquid grace, her silver gown shimmering in the torchlight, her eyes the color of a twilight sky fixed on a single target. Kingsley. She approached the throne, a vision of ethereal beauty and divine purpose, and knelt before him, her head bowed in a gesture of perfect, practiced submission. "My king," she said, her voice a melodic, captivating song that seemed to charm every wolf in the room. "I have traveled from the far north, guided by the spirits. They told me of your plight, of the curse that strangles your lands. They told me that I am the one you have been waiting for. I am your true, fated mate, and I have come to save you." The court erupted in a chorus of gasps and excited murmurs. A true, fated mate, a spirit wolf. It was a miracle, a gift from the ancestors. Vera stood beside the throne, a cold, hard knot of ice forming in her stomach. She watched as Serafina looked up at Kingsley, her eyes shining with a love so pure, so absolute it had to be a lie. Kingsley's expression was unreadable, a mask of regal indifference. But Vera, who had spent countless nights watching him, studying him, saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something cold and hard in his golden eyes. He did not feel the jolt of recognition, the pull of the fated bond. He felt nothing. He looked at Serafina, then his gaze shifted, finding Vera in the crowd. And in his eyes she saw not confusion, not doubt, but a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. His gut was screaming that this was a lie, a performance, a trap. And his gut was rarely wrong. That night, while the court celebrated the arrival of their supposed savior, Vera went to work. She slipped into the castle's archives, a ghost in a sea of data, her fingers flying across a hidden data pad. Serafina's story was too perfect, too clean. There had to be a flaw, a crack in the pristine facade, and she found it. a shipping manifest from a northern port, dated a week before Seraphina's supposed spiritual awakening. It listed a large, opulent carriage, a dozen trunks of silk gowns, and a crate of rare exotic perfumes, all bound for the capital, all paid for by an anonymous benefactor. An anonymous benefactor whose digital signature, when Vera finally cracked it, was all too familiar. She presented the evidence to Kingsley in the dead of night, her heart hammering against her ribs. He looked at the data, his face a thunderous mask of cold, controlled fury. The next day, he summoned Seraphina to the throne room. Before the entire court, he laid out the evidence of her deception. The color drained from her face, her perfect mask of serenity shattering into a million pieces. She collapsed at his feet, her body racked with sobs. "He made me do it," she cried, her voice no longer a melodic song, but a desperate, broken wail. "He promised me power, wealth. He said you were weak, that you needed to be replaced." Kingsley's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Who?" he demanded. "Who is the serpent in my garden?" Seraphina looked up, her eyes wide with terror, and pointed a trembling finger not at some foreign enemy, but at the man who stood at Kingsley's right hand. His mentor, his most trusted advisor, the man who had raised him like a son. Chapter 12. The Mentor's Betrayal. The confrontation took place not in the cold, formal throne room, but in the mentor's private chambers, a place of warmth and comfort that now felt like a tomb. The old wolf stood by the fire, his face etched with a strange, tragic calm. He did not seem surprised to see them. He did not deny the accusation. "I did it for the kingdom," he said, his voice a hoarse, weary rasp. "I did it for our people." Kingsley's face was a mask of cold, numb disbelief. "You betrayed me," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "You betrayed everything we stood for." "You are weak, my boy," the mentor countered, his voice gaining a feverish, fanatical intensity. "You let your sentiment, your loneliness, cloud your judgment. You seek a partner, an equal. A king does not need a partner. He needs a tool, a vessel for his power. Seraphina would have been that tool. But you chose the broken ghost." He looked at Vera then, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You think you are so clever, little rogue, but you are nothing but a pawn in a much larger game." "It's over, Ronan," Kingsley said, taking a step forward, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You will answer for your treason." The old wolf laughed, a dry, rattling sound that held no humor. "Over? Oh, my boy, it is just beginning." He reached into his robes and produced a small dark stone that seemed to drink the light from the room. The air grew cold, the shadows deepening. "You think this was about the throne. This was never about the throne." The stone began to glow, a malevolent purple light pulsing from its core. "He is coming," Ronan whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and ecstatic reverence. "An ancient power, a being of pure, unadulterated will. And he needs two things to restore his glorious, shattered kingdom: the blood of the old kings and the blood of the last spirit wolf." A wave of dark energy erupted from the stone, throwing Kingsley and Vera back. The windows of the chamber shattered, a whirlwind of glass and icy wind tearing through the room. Ronan stood in the center of the maelstrom, his body beginning to dissolve into shadow. "You cannot stop him," he hissed, his voice a distorted echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "He has been waiting for you, little ghost, waiting for you to come home." He turned his mad, glowing eyes on Vera, a final, chilling smile twisting his lips. "The massacre," he rasped, the words a poisoned dart that found its mark in the deepest, most wounded part of her soul. "The massacre was a lie. Your savior was your destroyer, and he is very, very eager to be reunited with his lost little artifact." With a final, explosive pulse of dark energy, he was gone, his mad laughter echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. All that remained was the chilling, impossible question that now hung in the air, a question that shattered the very foundation of Vera's world. What massacre? Chapter 13. The Buried Truth. The castle had become a cage of whispers and sideways glances. Ronan's betrayal had poisoned the court, seeding doubt and suspicion in every shadow. To stay was to be consumed by the political rot. And so, under the cloak of a moonless night, they left. Two figures on horseback, leaving behind a kingdom of lies to chase a truth that promised to be even more terrifying. They rode hard and fast, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the gilded cage of the capital. The land around them was a testament to the curse's insidious power, a gray, dying world of skeletal trees and dust-choked fields. The air itself was thin, brittle, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the final, inevitable end. They made camp in the shadow of a crumbling ruin, the fire a small, defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. The silence between them was no longer tense and hostile, but heavy with unspoken questions. Vera stared into the flames, her face a mask of stone. But Kingsley could see the storm raging beneath the surface. Ronan's final words had been a key, unlocking a door in her mind she had kept bolted for a decade. "What massacre?" he asked, his voice a soft, gentle prod in the quiet of the night. She flinched, her carefully constructed walls trembling. He didn't push. He simply waited, his patience a silent invitation. "And so," she told him. The words came out in a torrent, a story she had never spoken aloud, a memory she had relived 1,000,000 times in the solitude of her nightmares. She spoke of her pack, a small, peaceful community in the northern wilds. She spoke of the attack, a blur of fire and screams and the scent of blood. She spoke of being found by a kind, gentle old man, a wandering scholar who had nursed her back to health, who had told her that she was the sole survivor of a brutal massacre, a victim of the Alpha King's territorial wars. This man, this savior, had given her a purpose. He had fueled her rage, honed her skills, and pointed her like a loaded gun at the heart of the kingdom. He had given her the name Wraith, and he had been Ronan's master. As she spoke, the story began to unravel, the familiar narrative fraying at the edges. The details, once so sharp and clear, now seemed fuzzy, dreamlike. The gaps in her memory, the parts she had always attributed to trauma, now seemed intentional. Kingsley listened, his expression unreadable, his gaze never leaving her face. When she was finished, a raw, ragged silence descended upon them. She felt stripped bare, her deepest wound exposed to the night air. She expected pity, or perhaps even a hint of satisfaction. She did not expect him to reach across the fire, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, steady, an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. "You are not a ghost, Vera," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And you are not alone." They stayed like that for a long time, the fire dwindling to embers, the weight of a shared past and an uncertain future settling around them. The next morning, they rode on, their destination no longer just a place on a map, but the very heart of the lie that had defined her entire life. They were close. The air grew still, heavy, thick with a wrongness that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. Chapter 14. The Unearthing of a Lie. The site of the massacre was not a graveyard. There were no weathered headstones, no signs of a struggle, no lingering scent of death. There was only an unnatural, oppressive silence. A circle of ancient, monolithic stones stood sentinel in a clearing, the grass within their bounds a vibrant, impossible green against the gray, dying landscape. The air hummed, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in their very bones. This was not a place of death. It was a place of power. Contained, waiting. Vera slid from her horse, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling. The memories, her memories, they were wrong. They didn't fit. The scent of blood, the screams. They felt like a story she had been told, not a life she had lived. Kingsley dismounted, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his golden eyes scanning the clearing. "This is a place of ritual," he said, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "Old magic. The stones are a lock, a seal." He walked to the center of the circle, his boots sinking into the unnaturally soft turf. He knelt, his fingers tracing a series of faint, almost invisible runes carved into the earth. "They weren't trying to kill your pack," he said, his voice tight with a dawning horror. "They were trying to hide you." As his fingers brushed the final rune, the ground began to tremble. A low grinding sound echoed through the clearing as a section of the earth in the center of the circle began to recede, revealing a hidden chamber beneath. A stone pedestal rose from the darkness, and resting upon it was a small, ornate box, carved from a material that seemed to drink the light. The artifact. But it wasn't the box that stole the breath from Vera's lungs. It was the scent that wafted from the open chamber. The scent of moonflowers. The scent of her savior. "You were always a clever girl." The voice was a silken, chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. A figure coalesced from the shadows, a tall, elegant being with eyes the color of a twilight sky, and a smile that was all charm and no warmth. It was the man from her memories, the kind, gentle scholar who had saved her. But there was no kindness in his eyes now. Only a cold, ancient hunger. "It took you longer than I expected to find your way home," he said, his voice dripping with a condescending affection that made her skin crawl. "But no matter. You are here now, and you have brought the key." He gestured to Kingsley, whose hand was still on the hilt of his sword, his body frozen by an unseen force. The blood of the old kings, the final piece of the puzzle. He glided to the pedestal and took the box, his long, slender fingers caressing it with a lover's tenderness. "I have waited centuries for this," he purred. "Centuries of watching my own kingdom wither and die, but no more. With this artifact and the power that flows in both your veins, I will restore my world to its former glory. Your world is simply the sacrifice." He turned his twilight eyes on Vera, his smile widening. "You have played your part beautifully, my little ghost. You were the perfect, broken, vengeful pawn. And now, your purpose is fulfilled." The ground shook, the stones glowing with a malevolent, purple light. The trap, so carefully laid, so patiently waiting, had finally been sprung. Chapter 15. The Weight of Ruin. The power that erupted from the villain was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It was not the raw, elemental fury of a wolf, but something older, colder, more profound. It was the crushing weight of 1,000 years of patient, malevolent will. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on them, stealing the breath from their lungs. Vera and Kingsley stood side by side, their own powers rising to meet the threat, their auras intertwining into a shield of silver and gold. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a sheet of glass. The villain simply pushed, and their shield shattered. They were thrown back, their bodies slamming against the ancient stones with a force that rattled their bones. Kingsley was on his feet in an instant, a snarl ripping from his throat as he charged, his sword a blur of silver. The villain didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand, and Kingsley was frozen in mid-stride, his body encased in an invisible, unyielding force. Such primal rage, the villain mused, his voice a low, mocking purr. So predictable. He flicked his wrist, and Kingsley was sent flying, crashing into the forest with a sound of splintering wood and a pained, guttural cry. "No!" Vera screamed, a wave of pure, untamed energy erupting from her, the full, unrestrained power of her awakened spirit wolf. The ground cracked beneath her feet, the air crackling with ozone. For a single, fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of surprise in the villain's twilight eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a look of hungry, avaricious delight. "Ah," he breathed, his smile widening. "There it is. The power of the Creator, the spark that can ignite a world, or snuff it out." He opened the box, and a wave of darkness, of pure, unadulterated nothingness, poured out, swallowing her power, smothering it like a blanket. The strength drained from her limbs, her life force siphoned away by the insatiable hunger of the artifact. She collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, her vision blurring. The villain glided towards her, his movements fluid, graceful. He knelt before her, tilting her chin up with a single cold finger. "You are not just a spirit wolf, my dear," he whispered, his voice a silken, poisonous caress. "You are a vessel, a key. Your bloodline was created for a single purpose, to unlock this." He gestured to the box, which was now pulsing with a dark, terrifying light. "Your savior did not just find you. He made you. He groomed you. He broke you. All to bring you to this exact moment, a perfect, tragic little circle." He stood, a final, pitying smile on his lips. "You have my gratitude, and my condolences." He turned and walked away, the artifact in his hand, leaving them broken, drained, and defeated in the heart of the lie that had been Vera's entire life. The silence that descended was absolute, a crushing, suffocating weight of failure and despair. They had lost, and the real war had not even begun. Chapter 16. The Blighted Lands. The journey back to the capital was a waking nightmare. Every step was an agony, every breath a struggle. The villain had not just wounded them, he had hollowed them out, leaving a chilling void where their power used to be. They arrived not as a king and his chosen, but as two ghosts, leaning on each other for support, their faces pale and drawn in the gray light of dawn. The city they returned to was a vision of hell. The curse, once a slow, creeping decay, had accelerated into a galloping plague. The blight, a creeping black rot, now crawled up the very walls of the castle, and the air was thick with the sweet, sickening stench of decay. People huddled in the streets, their faces etched with a new, terrifying level of fear. A sickness had taken hold, a magical malady that left its victims weak and listless, their own life force slowly draining away. Kingsley's remaining council, their faces grim, met them in the throne room. Panic and despair radiated from them in suffocating waves. Reports flooded in from every corner of the kingdom. The blight was spreading, the sickness was rampant, and their people were losing hope. Vera stood by Kingsley's side, a silent, watchful presence, her mind racing. The villain's attack had not just been on them, it had been on the land itself, a massive, coordinated strike designed to bring the kingdom to its knees. They needed to rally their allies, to formulate a defense, to fight back. But as Kingsley gave orders, his voice strained but steady, Vera felt a cold, prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Something was wrong. One of the advisors, a man named Marcus, whom Kingsley had always trusted, was too calm, his eyes too clear amidst the chaos. While others panicked, he offered logical, reasonable solutions that seemed designed to spread their already thin forces even thinner. Vera watched him, her instincts, honed by years of sniffing out rats in digital mazes, screaming at her. She slipped away, her movements a faint whisper in the bustling hall, and made her way to the castle's communication spire. Her own devices were gone, but the castles were vulnerable to a ghost with nothing left to lose. It took her less than 5 minutes to find it. A series of encrypted messages sent from a terminal in Marcus's own chambers, detailing their every move, their every plan, their every weakness. The messages were addressed to Ronan. She returned to the throne room, the data slate cold and heavy in her hand. She didn't speak. She simply handed it to Kingsley. He read the messages, his face slowly draining of all color, his expression crumbling from that of a king to that of a man who had just been stabbed in the heart by his last friend. He looked up, his golden eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. The advisor met his gaze, and for a single, fleeting moment, his calm facade cracked, revealing the smug, triumphant serpent beneath. He didn't even try to run. He knew, and they knew, that it was already too late. The final betrayal had been delivered. They were utterly, completely alone, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see, in a home that had become their tomb. Chapter 17. The Weight of Ghosts. The heavy doors of the royal chambers slammed shut, the sound echoing the final brutal closing of a chapter. The mask of the king and his consort had crumbled, leaving two broken, exhausted people in its place. The energy that had once crackled between them, a living, breathing thing, was now a faint, sputtering ember, threatening to go out at any moment. Kingsley poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements stiff, his hands unsteady. He handed one to Vera, their fingers brushing, but there was no spark, no jolt of connection. There was only a cold, empty void. He stared into the swirling crimson liquid, his reflection a pale, haunted stranger. "Everything," he whispered, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "Everything I have ever done to protect this kingdom has led to this, to ruin." Vera said nothing. She retreated to the far side of the room, her body curling in on itself, a subconscious return to the solitary, defensive posture of the wraith. The trust she had so tentatively, so reluctantly placed in him felt like a fool's gambit. It had been a weakness, a chink in her armor that the world had gleefully exploited. "This is what happens when you trust people," she said, her voice a low, bitter murmur. "This is what happens when you let them in. They betray you. They use you. They leave you to rot." Her words were a shield, a wall of ice she was frantically trying to rebuild around her shattered heart. Kingsley looked up, his golden eyes flashing with a pain so deep it was almost black. "Is that what you think this is?" he demanded, his voice rising, cracking under the strain. "You think I used you?" "Didn't you?" she shot back, her own voice rising to meet his. "You bought me. You kept me here. You used my skills to hunt your enemies. And now look where we are. Your kingdom is dying, and I am this empty, broken thing." The accusation, so unjust, so born of her own terror and self-loathing, was a slap in the face. "I defended you!" he roared, slamming his glass down on the table, the wine sloshing over the rim like blood. "I stood by you, I trusted you, and you think I would do all of that just to use you?" "It doesn't matter what I think," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving behind a cold, desolate emptiness. "It doesn't matter what either of us intended. Look at the result. We failed. Together, we are a catastrophe." She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the reflection of her own failure in his eyes. "I work alone," she said, the words a final, desperate retreat into the cold, safe solitude of her past. "That's how I survived. That's the only way I know how to be." She turned her back on him, a gesture more final than any slammed door. The silence that followed was a living, breathing thing, a suffocating presence that was filled with the ghosts of what they had almost been. Their partnership, the one thing they had managed to build amidst the ruins, had just been shattered, and they had never been more alone. Chapter 18. A Reckoning in Solitude. Vera found her way to the library, the one place in the castle that had ever felt like a sanctuary. But the comfort it had once offered was gone. The towering shelves of books, once a promise of endless knowledge, now seemed like silent, accusing witnesses. The air, once thick with the scent of old paper and leather, now tasted of dust and decay. She sank to the floor, her back against a cold, unyielding bookshelf, and for the first time in a decade, she allowed herself to truly, completely break. The tears came, hot and silent, a torrent of grief for a life she had never had, for a family she had never known, for a purpose that had been a lie from the very beginning. Her quest for revenge, the singular burning star that had guided her through the darkness, had been nothing but a phantom. A cruel, elaborate joke. She had dedicated her life to avenging a ghost, and in doing so, she had become one herself. A hollow, empty thing, with no past, no future, and a present that was crumbling to ash around her. Miles away, in the cavernous, empty throne room, Kingsley stood before the symbol of his power and his failure. The stone throne was cold, hard, and unforgiving. He had sat there for years, a solitary figure, convinced that he alone had to bear the weight of the crown, that he alone had to be the shield that protected his people. He had pushed everyone away, kept everyone at a distance, believing that control was strength, that solitude was safety. And what had it gotten him? A court full of vipers, a kingdom on the brink of collapse, and a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. He had been so obsessed with bearing the burden alone that he had failed to see the one person who had been strong enough to help him carry it. He had seen Vera as a weapon, then as an ally, then as something more. But he had never truly seen her as an equal. He had never truly trusted her. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. He had tried to protect her, to possess her, but he had never truly opened himself up to her. And now, she was gone. Separated by stone and sorrow, they arrived at the same devastating conclusion. Their strength had never been in their individual power, in her skills or his authority. It had been in the bond that had snapped into place between them, the fragile, terrifying connection they had both fought and feared, and, for a fleeting moment, embraced. That bond was their true power, the one force in the universe that might have been strong enough to stand against the coming darkness. And in their fear, in their grief, in their stubborn, solitary pride, they had taken that bond and shattered it into a million pieces. The silence in the library, the silence in the throne room, it was the same silence. The silence of absolute, soul-crushing defeat. The silence of all hope being lost. Chapter 19. A Spark in the Ashes. The library was a tomb of forgotten words, a monument to a world that was turning to dust. Vera sat amidst the ruins of her own making, the cold stone floor a comfort against her burning, tear-streaked face. The grief had passed, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. The wraith was all that was left. Not the vengeful, angry phantom she had once been, but a ghost stripped of its purpose, its chains, its very reason for being. Her fingers, moving on instinct alone, summoned a holographic interface from a device she had hidden in the spine of a book. The familiar cascade of green code was a comfort, a language she understood better than the treacherous, messy language of the heart. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, she was just drifting. Adrift in the digital sea of her own past. She scrolled through the files, the ghosts of her old life flickering before her eyes. Blackmail on corporate titans, dirt on corrupt politicians, evidence of 100 lesser betrayals. It was a museum of human ugliness, a testament to a life spent in the shadows. She almost dismissed it, almost let the screen fade to black. But some small stubborn spark, some dying ember of the woman who had fought so hard to survive, refused to let go. Her fingers moved, unearthing a deep, heavily encrypted folder she had labeled Mythology Nonsense. It was a collection of digital texts she had stolen years ago, tales of the old world, of shifter lore she had dismissed as irrelevant fairy tales. Her eyes scanned the ancient digital text, the words blurring together until a single phrase snagged her attention: the dual-aspected bond. The text spoke of a rare, almost mythical connection between two spirit wolves, a bond that was not just a chain of fate, but a conduit of immense power. It described how such a bond, when in perfect harmony, could channel the very life force of the world. It could be used to create, to heal, to build. But if a dissonant, malevolent force tried to wield one half of that bond, it could be used to corrupt, to drain, to destroy. The villain wasn't just using the artifact to amplify his own power. He was using the artifact to corrupt their bond, turning their own life force into the very poison that was killing the kingdom. The text spoke of a single weakness. The bond could not be broken by force, but it could be severed or repurposed. If the two bonded wolves acted as one, a single unified will, They could reclaim the energy, sever the connection to the corrupting influence, and turn the poison back on its source. It wasn't about overpowering the villain. It was about outsmarting him. It was about turning his greatest weapon into his own undoing. A single shuddering breath escaped Vera's lips. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane gamble. But it was a chance. The spark of hope, so small, so fragile, ignited in the hollow void of her chest, a tiny, defiant flame against the overwhelming darkness. The wraith was dead. Vera was alive, and she was done being a ghost. She stood, her body aching, her spirit bruised, but her eyes burned with a new, terrible purpose. Not revenge, not even justice, survival. She left the library, her footsteps echoing in the silent castle, her path clear, her destination certain. She had to find her king. Chapter 20. The Forging of a Bond. She found him in the throne room, a solitary figure standing before the cold, empty seat of his power. He looked smaller. The weight of his failure had stooped his broad shoulders. The light in his golden eyes dimmed to a dull, weary amber. He heard her approach, but he didn't turn. The air between them was thick with the ghosts of their angry, broken words. She didn't offer an apology, and he didn't ask for one. Their pain, their regret. It was a shared thing, a wound that needed no words. She simply walked to his side and held out the datapad, the ancient text glowing in the gloom of the great hall. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. This time, there was a spark. Faint, hesitant, but there. A flicker of the bond that had once blazed between them. He read, his eyes scanning the text, his expression shifting from weary resignation to a dawning, incredulous hope. He read it once, then twice, the implications of the words sinking in, rewriting the narrative of their defeat. When he looked up at her, the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a familiar, sharp intelligence. "Is this possible?" he asked, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "We can sever his connection to our bond?" "We can do more than that," she said, her own voice steady, sure. "We can take the power he's stolen and use it to heal the land. We can turn his weapon back on him." They stood in the silence, the audacious, impossible plan hanging in the air between them. It was a suicide mission, a desperate gamble with the fate of the world as the stakes. But as they looked at each other, they saw not fear, but a shared, unwavering resolve. The bond between them, once a sputtering ember, began to glow, to warm, fed not by fate, but by a conscious, deliberate choice. "I am sorry," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he had never allowed himself to show, "for trying to carry this alone, for not seeing you." "I am sorry too," she whispered, her own walls crumbling to dust, "for hiding, for pushing you away." He reached for her then, not with the possessive claim of a king, but with the gentle, hesitant touch of a man reaching for his only anchor in a raging storm. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "I choose you, Vera," he said, his voice thick with a love so profound it was a physical ache in her chest. "Not because of fate, or power, or this bond. I choose you." "And I choose you," she replied, her own voice breaking, a single, perfect tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It was a confession, a vow, a promise made in the heart of their dying world. He lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle, reverent meeting of lips that held all the pain, all the sorrow, and all the hope of their shared journey. It was not a kiss of passion, but of partnership, of absolute, unconditional trust. When they broke apart, the bond between them was no longer a fragile, uncertain thing. It was a blazing inferno, a tempered, unbreakable chain forged in the fires of betrayal, despair, and, finally, of love. They were not just fated mates. They were partners. And they were ready for war. Chapter 21. The Last Stand. There were no grand speeches, no rousing calls to arms. Hope was a currency they could no longer afford to spend. Instead, they gathered the last remnants of their loyal forces, a handful of grim-faced guards and 2 aging council members who had not yet succumbed to fear or betrayal, in the cold, echoing expanse of the Great Hall. Kingsley and Vera stood before them, not as a king and his consort, but as 2 soldiers on the eve of a battle they were not expected to win. They laid out the plan, their voices low and steady, their words stripped of all pretense, all false optimism. They spoke of the villain, of the artifact, of the corrupted bond. They spoke of a single, desperate chance to sever his power and heal the land. "The odds are against us," Kingsley said, his gaze meeting the eyes of each and every person in the room. "The enemy we face is ancient, powerful, and he believes he has already won. What I ask of you is not to fight for your king. I ask you to fight for your home, for your families, for the slimmest chance of a dawn you may not live to see." Vera stepped forward, her presence a quiet, steady counterpoint to his regal authority. "We are not asking you to die for us," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We are asking you to trust us, to stand with us. One last time." There was no cheering, no boisterous shouts of loyalty. There was only a quiet, resolute silence. Then, one by one, the guards drew their swords, the sound of steel ringing in the cavernous hall, a solemn, unified vow. The old council members nodded, their faces etched with a grim, unwavering resolve. It was not a force that could win a war, but it was a force that would not break. They rode out from the capital, a small, determined band against a world of darkness. The journey to the heart of the Blight, to the place where the villain was undoubtedly consolidating his power, was a grim, silent procession. The land grew darker, more twisted, the very air thick with a malevolent, corrupting energy that sought to sap their will, to feed their despair. They were met with resistance, not an army, but traps, illusions that preyed on their fears, pockets of corrupted pack members, their eyes glowing with a sick, purple light, who attacked with a mindless, feral rage. But Vera and Kingsley moved as one, their bond a seamless, intuitive connection. She would sense a magical trap, and he would counter it with a blast of raw, protective energy. He would spot a physical ambush, and she would use her knowledge of the terrain, gleaned from 1,000 stolen maps, to guide them through it. They did not need to speak. They simply acted. A perfect, deadly dance of 2 spirits moving as one. Their small band of followers watched in awe, their own flagging spirits bolstered by the sight of their leader's unwavering unity. As they crested the final, blighted hill, they saw it. A fortress of twisted, black rock that had not been there before, a jagged spike of pure malice that pulsed with a dark, corrupting light. The villain's lair, the end of the line. They stood there, a small, defiant flicker of light against an overwhelming darkness, ready for the final, desperate battle for the soul of their world. Chapter 22. The Heart of the Blight. The fortress was a monument to malice, a place where the very laws of nature had been twisted and broken. The air was a thick, suffocating soup of corruption, and the shadows themselves seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Corrupted wolves, their eyes glowing with a mindless purple light, threw themselves at their small band of followers, and the clash of steel echoed in the dead, oppressive air. But Vera and Kingsley did not stop. They moved as one, a single unified purpose driving them forward, their eyes fixed on the pulsating heart of the fortress. Their allies bought them the time they needed, a living, breathing wall of desperate courage against a tide of darkness. They found him in the central chamber, a vast, cavernous space where the blight was thickest. The villain stood on a raised dais, the artifact floating before him, pulsing with a dark, sickening light. Tendrils of this dark energy snaked out from the box, plunging into the very heart of the land, while another, more intimate tendril was connected to the faint, spectral image of the bond that connected Vera and Kingsley. He was not just draining the kingdom. He was using their own life force as the catalyst. He turned, a slow, languid movement, his smile a mask of serene, confident power. "Welcome," he purred. You are just in time for the end." He did not attack them with force. He attacked them with their own ghosts. The chamber dissolved, and Kingsley found himself back in the throne room, his father before him, his face a mask of cold, disappointed fury. "You have failed, my son," the phantom hissed. "You have brought ruin to our name." Simultaneously, Vera was back in the ashes of her old life. The kind, gentle face of her savior looking down at her, his eyes full of pity. "You were always so broken, my child," he whispered. "So easy to manipulate." The phantoms were designed to sever their trust, to feed their deepest insecurities, to make them turn on each other. But they had already faced these ghosts. They had already made their peace with their failures. Kingsley reached out, his hand finding Vera's in the swirling chaos of the illusion. Their fingers intertwined, a single, solid point of reality in a world of lies. "You are not my failure," he said, his voice a clear, steady anchor. "You are my strength." "And you are not my weakness," she replied, her own voice ringing with a newfound certainty. "You are my truth." The illusions flickered, the phantoms screaming in silent, impotent rage as the pure, untainted power of their unified bond burned them away to nothing. The chamber solidified, and they saw the flicker of true, unadulterated shock on the villain's face. He had expected them to break. He had not expected them to be whole. They charged, not at him, but at the artifact. He threw a wave of dark, corrupting energy at them, but it was like trying to stop the dawn. They pushed through it, the force of their love, their trust, their absolute unwavering unity, a shield that could not be broken. They reached the dais, their hands still clasped, reaching for the pulsing, malevolent box. But they did not try to destroy it. They did not try to fight it. They did something the villain, in all his ancient, arrogant wisdom, had never anticipated. They surrendered to it. They poured their own life force, their own pure, untainted energy, into the artifact, flooding the corrupted bond with a wave of pure, unadulterated creation. For a single, terrifying moment, the darkness consumed them. And then, with a sound that was both a scream and a sigh of relief, the artifact, unable to contain the warring energies, exploded in a blinding, cleansing flash of pure, white light. The villain, his form dissolving in the radiant energy, let out a final, incredulous cry of defeat. The curse and the creature that had wielded it were no more. Chapter 23. The First Dawn. The silence that followed the explosion was absolute. A profound, deafening quiet that was more shocking than the battle itself. The fortress of black rock crumbled around them, dissolving into dust and memories, until they were left standing on a barren, rocky outcrop. The first hesitant rays of a new dawn painting the horizon in shades of rose and gold. The wave of healing energy, released from the shattered artifact, washed over the land, a visible, shimmering tide of pure, untainted life. They watched as the blight receded, as the black, twisted trees shed their dead bark to reveal new, green shoots, as the dust-choked rivers began to flow with clean, clear water. The sickness, the despair, the curse, it was gone. They stood in the silence, their hands still clasped, their bodies aching with an exhaustion so profound it was a physical weight. They had won. The thought was so simple, so immense, that it was almost impossible to comprehend. Their surviving followers, their faces streaked with grime and tears, let out a ragged, joyous cheer that echoed in the clean, new air. They had done it. They had survived. The journey back to the capital was a slow, triumphant procession. They were met not with fear and despair, but with joyous, tearful crowds. The sick were rising from their beds, the blight was gone from the city walls, and the air itself tasted sweet, clean, and full of promise. Vera and Kingsley moved through the crowds, not as a king and his consort, but as two weary soldiers returning from a long and brutal war. They worked side by side with their people, tending to the wounded, organizing the rebuilding efforts, their presence a quiet, steadying force in the joyous chaos. The ghosts of their pasts had been laid to rest, their individual burdens lifted. All that was left was the shared, quiet strength of two people who had faced the end of the world and chosen to build a new one in its place. That evening, they stood on the balcony where he had once confessed his loneliness, the same balcony where they had forged their desperate plan. The city below was a tapestry of warm, welcoming lights, the sound of laughter and music drifting up to them on the gentle night air. The moon, full and bright, bathed the world in a soft silver light. He reached for her, his hand gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into his touch, a quiet, contented sigh escaping her lips. The battle was over. The kingdom was saved. Their own personal war had been won. But as they looked out at the city, at the long, challenging road of rebuilding that lay before them, they knew that their journey, their real journey, the one they would walk as partners, as leaders, as mates, had only just begun. And for the first time, they faced the future not with fear, but with a quiet, unshakable hope. Chapter 24. 2 Thrones, 1 Kingdom. A year later, the kingdom was not just rebuilt, it was reborn. The land was lush and green, the cities vibrant and prosperous, the air thick with the scent of new growth and the sound of children's laughter. The scars of the blight remained, a faint silvery tracery on the oldest trees, a subtle reminder of the darkness they had overcome. But they were just that. Scars. A testament to a wound that had healed. In the great hall, where one cold stone throne had once stood as a symbol of solitary, burdened rule, 2 now stood side by side. Carved from the same living wood, they were a symbol not of power, but of partnership, of balance, of a kingdom ruled not by one, but by 2. Kingsley was a different man. The weary, haunted king was gone, replaced by a leader whose strength was tempered with a gentle, easy warmth. He smiled more, laughed more, his golden eyes shining with a light that came not from his crown, but from his heart. He ruled with a wisdom that came from having faced the abyss and chosen to trust, to share, to love. He was a king not just of his people, but for his people. And beside him, his queen, his mate, his partner, was the ghost who had found her home. Vera was no longer the wraith. She moved with a quiet, confident grace, her counsel sought and respected by all. Her sharp, analytical mind was a perfect complement to his strategic wisdom, her empathy a balance to his authority. She had found a purpose not in vengeance, but in creation. She had found a family not in the ghosts of the past, but in the vibrant, living pack that now looked to her as their Luna, their queen. She had not just found her place in the world, she had helped to build it. That evening, they stood on the balcony, a familiar, comfortable ritual. The city below was a jewel box of glittering lights, a testament to all they had built together. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, their bodies fitting together with a practiced ease. The bond between them was no longer a raging inferno or a desperate, clinging thing. It was a quiet, steady warmth, a constant, comforting presence that was as natural as breathing. "Do you remember?" he murmured, his voice a low, soft rumble against her ear. "Standing here a year ago, convinced that all was lost?" She smiled, a soft, genuine expression of pure, unadulterated happiness. "I remember a lonely king and a broken ghost," she replied, her voice a gentle whisper. "I don't see them here anymore." She turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest, over his heart. "What do you see?" he asked, his golden eyes full of a love so profound, it still, after all this time, took her breath away. She looked up at him, at her king, her partner, her mate. And the core emotional question that had driven their entire journey was finally, completely, answered. "I see home," she said. And in the quiet, peaceful silence of their reborn kingdom, They sealed their promise with a kiss, a testament to a love that had not just survived the darkness, but had become the light that had banished it forever.